So, I guess we can start. Does everyone have a copy of the suttas? I have some spare copies over here if anyone needs anything. So let's okay. Robin, okay, I'll give you, you can have a copy. So, let's give you the exact right, where it goes. There you are. Okay. Okay, so now we can get on with the exciting stuff, the word of the Buddha. And the idea with this is, of course, to look basically at how to practice the path. And I always like when we do meditation retreats to look at the path in a very broad way, not just look at the actual activity of meditation, but look at the whole path itself. Because the path is very integrated, and if you look at meditation in isolation, you lose so much of what the path really is about. So I think it's very important to take into account all the factors and see how it is all integrated, to understand the broad picture of things and to see how meditation fits into that broad picture. And then you become, after a while, very skilled at how to deal with these things, and you understand exactly what it is that you have to do to be able to make progress in the spiritual practice. And progress in spiritual practice, what does that mean? It just means that you are becoming a more wholesome person. You have more positive mind states inside of you. You have more kindness. You have more compassion. You have more peace. You have more mindfulness. You have all of these things are kind of growing inside of you. And every time you come back to Jhana Grove, right, or some other meditation center, after being away for a few months or a year, whatever, you feel, wow, things have changed, right? And that is so inspiring when you see that inside of yourself. And this is what has sustained me as a Buddhist monk for now over 20 years, is the fact of this continuous growth in good qualities and a decline in the bad ones. You can see this beautiful process happening inside of yourself. So this is the idea of here of combining suttas with meditation to get this kind of broad idea of what we're supposed to be doing. And at the beginning, the first few sessions, I'm going to be focusing on like the big picture things, to look at things from a little bit of a bird's eye view, and take a step back, look at the broad picture, and then go into details later on. So this is what I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to start off today by looking a little bit at some of the parts of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And this sutta is the story of the Buddha's final days, his ending up with his passing away, and all the events that lead up to the Buddha's passing away. And this sutta is very interesting for many reasons, but of course one of the main reasons why it is so interesting is because the Buddha knows that he's going to pass away very soon, so now is the time to lay down his legacy, lay down how the Sangha, how the Buddhist community is going to survive after he passes away, to lay down what is the essence, the core of his message, how the Sangha should continue to operate without his guidance. When the Buddha is there, of course, then you always have somebody you can go to, ask for advice, ask for, to sort things out in the community if there is problem or there is disharmony or whatever. Once the Buddha is gone, it's like, oh, what do we do now? It's really, really difficult. And not only is it difficult, but it's also very hard, because when the Buddha passes away, it leaves an enormous vacuum in the Buddhist community. Suddenly, this rock, this solid thing that was there from the very beginning, that everybody was looking to for guidance, is gone. It's like it's something very, the core, in a sense, of the Buddhist community has disappeared, and everybody feels, of course, an enormous sense of loss when that happens. And this is this is a very interesting time period in Buddhism from the very earliest period. So for that reason, I want to have a look at this, and because the Buddha here lays down what he considers to be the core message of Buddhism, this, of course, is very interesting, because very often we argue about what are the real Buddhist teachings, etc. Well, if we want to know what the real Buddhist teachings are, let's ask the Buddha himself and see what he has to say about this. So this is what this really is all about. So let us start and with this sutta. This is Digha Nikaya number 16, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. I've been reading this out at the monastery recently. We have gone about maybe 20% of the sutta, and we have already done 7 sessions on the sutta. So it is full of very interesting stuff, this particular sutta. So this is just a small extract, and it goes as follows. So I should say maybe first of all that the background here is that Venerable Ananda is getting a bit upset. He says, oh, the directions aren't clear to me. It's as if I'm drugged because he has heard that the Buddha is about to pass away. So here is Venerable Ananda. He's a stream enterer. He has seen the Dhamma. He's one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha. And he is obviously having a really hard time dealing with the Buddha's passing away. And this is then what the Buddha responds to him. Ananda, have I not told you before, all those things that are dear and pleasant to us must suffer change, separation and alteration? So how could this be possible, that whatever is born become compounded and is liable to change, that it should not decay? This is impossible. And that has been renounced, given up, rejected, abandoned, and forsaken by the Tathagata. The Tathagata has renounced the life principles. The Tathagata has said once and for all, the Tathagata's final passing away will not be long delayed. 3 months from now, the Tathagata will take final Nibbana. That the Tathagata should withdraw such a declaration in order to live on, this is not possible. Now come, Ananda, we will go to the gabled hall in the great forest. Very good, Lord. So here is the Buddha reminding Venerable Ananda that all those things that are dear and pleasant must eventually pass away, must disappear. And a very simple statement. It is so obviously true. We all understand this when we read this, because everything in the world always changes. Everything is kind of unreliable. We know that. But even though we know that in one way, still, when things in the world do change, when things move in a direction that we don't like, still we feel upset by it. Still we feel that things, what's going to happen now? What does the future, hold for us? Where is what's happening to the world? And the world always seems so precarious. Always seems to be moving in strange directions. People don't really seem to be doing what is responsible. Politicians don't do what they should be doing, right? And all of these kind of things. But is that really the case? Maybe they are. Maybe politicians are just another force of nature, another part of nature, and they move in unreliable and uncertain ways. And very often what we find is that when we become upset by things happening in the world, the reason why we become upset is because we've taken our refuge in the wrong place. We've taken our refuge in the world rather than taking our refuge in the spiritual teachings, the Buddhist teachings, the Dhamma, etc., etc. That is where the real refuge is. That is where there is certainty. We can know that if we live well, if we do what is right, if we have a good heart, if we practice kindness and compassion and generosity in the world, we know that that is going to have good results. This is one of the laws of nature. At the same time, while we know that, or rather when we know that, that is where we then move, rather than taking refuge in those things that are inherently unreliable and uncertain. So notice that it happens to almost everybody. Sometimes we take refuge in the wrong things, and whenever you feel, the world is not going as I think it should go, then you know that you actually have taken refuge in the wrong place. The world is like this. It is unreliable. It is never going to go the way we want it to go, or the way we think it should go. And here we have Venerable Ananda, right? The stream enterer, again one of the great disciples of the Buddha. He too has made that mistake. So we are, in a sense, in good company here, right? So we make a mistake, it's okay. But still a wonderful reminder to us all to remember this. This is a little bit beside the point, but I think it is a very important point, especially at a time when many people feel that, oh, we don't really know where the world is going, so many strange things happening all over the place, and then to come back to something that has a degree of certainty, something that we actually can rely on, is so useful. And that, of course, is precisely the idea of taking refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, what that is all about, having that sense of something that we can hold on to in a world of uncertainty here. So, so then the Buddha says that everything is compounded, and everything that has been born, compounded, that will eventually have to pass away. And of course the Buddha has abandoned, rejected all that, and rejecting that just means that you have given up any desire and attachment for those things. So the Buddha basically just saying that he's given up attachment and desire for all these phenomena in the world that are unreliable, which is pretty much everything, right? Everything is unreliable, so everything is pretty much included in that. Then he says that the Buddha's his passing away will happen sooner. And here you have this feeling, this idea that the Buddha has some sense of being able to control when he's passing away. And of course that is true for all of us. There is some degree of control there. We know the kind of mind states that lead to prolonged life. If you are happy, you are living well, you tend to live longer. If you grieve a lot, life tends to be shorter. You know, husband and wife who have been living together their whole life, one of them dies, the other one dies soon afterwards, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah, it is because it is just too unbearable to live without your life partner by yourself after all those years. So that is basically what this is about. And we can see how this now is setting the scene for the Buddha to give a declaration about what the Dhamma is really about. So then this is what happens next. And the Lord went with Venerable Ananda to the gabled hall in the great forest. When he got there, he said, "Ananda, go and gather together all the monks living in the vicinity of Vesali and get them to come to the assembly hall." "Very good, Lord," said Ananda, and did so. He then returned to the Lord, saluted him, stood to one side, and said, "Lord, the order of monks is gathered together, and now is the time for the Lord to do as he wishes." In other words, please come at your convenience. So here, again, you get this feeling that the Buddha is going to make some important statement, right? Go and get all the monks living around Vesali and get them together. And presumably this would include perhaps the bhikkhunis as well, perhaps some lay people. Often these assemblies could be quite large, and it could actually include all the four assemblies of Buddhism, the lay people, male and female, and also the monks and the nuns. So this is kind of very exciting now, setting the scene for something major, a major pronouncement by the Buddha. Then the Lord entered the assembly hall and sat down on the prepared seat. Then he said to the monks, "Monks, those matters that I have discovered and proclaimed should be thoroughly learned by you, practiced, developed, and cultivated, so that this holy life may endure for a long time, that it may be for the benefit and happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit and happiness of devas and humans." And what are those matters? And they are the four foundations of mindfulness, the four right efforts, the four pathways of supernormal power, the five spiritual faculties, the five mental powers, the seven factors of awakening, and the noble eightfold path. So here the Buddha is laying down those things that are the crucial matters that he has discovered, right? The things that should be thoroughly learned by the monastics. They should be practiced, developed, and cultivated. And you can here see this twofold scheme. First of all, the importance here, of course, is that these are the things that the Buddha has discovered by himself and proclaimed. This is not theory, this is not philosophy. This is one of the things I think people often make a mistake about Buddhism. They think the Buddhist teaching is some kind of philosophy. But Buddhism is not really a philosophy. Later Buddhism is a philosophy, because in later Buddhism they expand on the teachings this way and that way. Abhidhamma, they kind of work it out in all the details. That's really philosophy. But the early Buddhist teaching is precisely not a philosophy. It is not about fleshing out the details about what exists in the world, what does not exist, how all of these things relate to each other. Early Buddhism is a pragmatic and practical path to overcome an existing problem right here and now. The problem of unsatisfactoriness, the problem of suffering in life, the problem of not being able to rely on anything. That is what the Buddhist path is all about. So this is the discovery of the Buddha is this pragmatic thing, right? This thing that we should actually be moving towards and overcoming these kind of problems. And you may wonder, how is it possible to discover a path? It says in the, if you go back to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the setting in motion of the wheel of the Dhamma, which is traditionally considered the first discourse of the Buddha, in there it says that the Buddha discovered the Four Noble Truths. And of course the noble truth of suffering is the first one, the idea that there is inherent suffering in existence. And you can sort of understand why people might discover that, because it's a matter of looking inside and trying to understand what the human being is all about, the mind, the body, and these kind of things. It's a matter of insight. But what about a path? How can you actually understand a path? How can you have insight into that? And I think the answer is that when you do reach awakening, when you do have a very profound insight into things, you understand the kind of mind state that is capable of that sort of insight. You know that there's only a mind state which is very, very pure, where there is no vested interest. Desire is like a vested interest in things. That vested interest has been abandoned. And when there's no vested interest in anything, and you look at then you can look at things with a purely equanimous mind, which is not leaning one way or the other. Only there is it possible to have insight, because only then is the mind neutral enough to see what's going on. So you understand the kind of mind state that is required, and from understanding that, you also understand the path that leads to that kind of purity of mind state, because you have practiced that path yourself as well in the past. But of course, very important here that the Buddha, this is a practical thing that the Buddha has seen for himself. It is not a philosophical thing at all. It comes down to what is discoverable in the world. And then the important thing that the monastics should learn this, right, first of all. And this, of course, is one of those things about the Buddhist tradition, that traditionally we learn, that people would learn these things by heart. They would pass it on from one generation to the next one, throughout the centuries, and eventually get it written down, etc. And this is a very important part of this practice, to learn the suttas, to understand them, to investigate them, and to penetrate them by view, as it is said in the suttas. So this whole idea of internalizing these things. But of course that is not really enough, because even though you may have internalized something in terms of memory, etc., it is only really when you practice these things that these things truly come alive. When you practice them and you see the results in your own heart. And this is why this very important thing in the Buddhism is the idea of the noble people in the world, especially the noble Sangha, the noble monastics, but also noble lay people, wherever they might be, because they have direct insight into those teachings. And it is only then that you can really rely 100% on your own understanding, when the insight and the learning kind of come together like this. And this is one of the reasons why it is so, why these teachings are so powerful, in my opinion, and why it is so important, in the sense, to merge the study of the suttas with inspiration in the areas the noble ones in the world, because the Aryas are the living example of the path, the people who have internalized things, and the suttas are the thing that has been handed down, the teaching, the doctrine in written form. And when those two things come together, whoa, it is very, very powerful. This ancient teaching that people have been practicing for 2,500 years. Then you have the living example, people practicing these things to the present day, and you see these things coming together. They gel, they match with each other, they work together. It gives is a source for great confidence and faith in these Buddhist teachings when those things match together beautifully like that. And of course, those Aryas are then become the Kalyanamitas, right? These become the real spiritual friends in the world, because the people who have understood these teachings to the core, they are the only ones who are really able to explain them properly and to make us understand what is going on. And these Kalyanamitas then become, as we shall see later on, the basis upon which the teachings are available to all of us. Without those Kalyanamitas, without the noble ones, basically there is always going to be too much uncertainty about the path. When they are there, when we have the teachings of the Buddha, then we have the foundation upon which we can practice. This is incredibly important in Buddhism. In fact, it is such an important foundation stone that without those Kalyanamitas, there is no way really of achieving the goals of this path. So it needs to be practiced, and as long as we find practicing people in the world, as long as the Noble Eightfold Path is practiced, there will also be Aryas, because the Aryas, the noble ones, are the result of this practice. So it's up to each one of us, right? Each one of us has to practice this path, and when each one of us does it, there will be some of us who actually get there, who attain these things, and then we will carry it on to the next generation, and they will carry it on to the generation after that, and it will keep on rolling like this. So one of the greatest dangers in Buddhism is when people say, "Oh yeah, no, these days you can't get anywhere, you can't practice anymore, nobody can become noble ones, right? You just have to chill and sit back and wait for Maitreya to arrive, and when Maitreya arrives, then I will practice." Sure, you're going to practice when Maitreya arrives. If you're not going to practice now, you're not going to practice when Maitreya comes, right? And anyway, who knows who Maitreya is? Nobody knows that. When you get there, if you haven't practiced properly, if you don't know enough about the Dhamma, Maitreya might walk straight in front of you. You have no idea. I just dismiss him as some other ascetic or whatever. This is the problem, right? So now is the opportunity. Now we have to practice. Now we have a chance of keeping these teachings going in the world. Whenever I hear that these teachings can't be practiced, the end of Buddhism has already arrived, my heart kind of sinks a little bit, because I know that that is really the sort of stuff that ensures the end coming. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say it can't be done, it won't be done, and it won't happen. Okay, so what are these things then that the Buddha has proclaimed? And first of all, of course, this very beautiful idea that they should be developed and cultivated so that this holy life, the spiritual life, endures for a long time, that it may be for the benefit and happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit and happiness of humans and devas. So, of course, the whole purpose of Buddhism is to help people to be more happy, to have less suffering. That is the only purpose of these teachings, nothing else. And that is what is so wonderful about them, right? They're all there just for the purpose of happiness, for the ending of suffering. What a wonderful thing it is that there is such a teaching in the world. No kind of sidetracks for kind of vested interest, no kind of, I want to be, I want to kind of be powerful and this kind of stuff. Well, that happens, of course, sometimes in spiritual communities, but it doesn't happen with the Buddha himself. It's all about the benefit of people. And what a wonderful thing it is that there is such a remarkable teaching available. So what are these things that are the core teaching of the Buddha, that the Buddha say we should remember and practice in this way? And there you are. I just mentioned them before. 4 foundations of mindfulness, maybe the 4 applications of mindfulness, perhaps. That is what I would prefer that as a translation. 4 right efforts. The 4 the 4 pathways, the 4 pathways to supernormal power. Iddhi. Iddhi is the Pali word for that. 5 spiritual faculties. 5 mental powers is the same as the 5 spiritual faculties, really. The 7 factors of awakening and the Noble Eightfold Path. These are called in Buddhism the 37 Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, the 37 aids to awakening as a group. And they are spoken of as a group in a number of places in the suttas. And here the Buddha says, this is the core of my teaching. This is what my teaching really is all about. And of course, when you look at that list, you will see that it is a list of factors that we are to practice. There's very little there that has to do with theory or with philosophy or anything like that. It's a very practical thing, things that we actually have to do to reach that awakening, to move towards greater happiness in our lives and less suffering. Very practical things. That is what is so interesting about those. And you may perhaps wonder, well, what about the Buddha also taught some things that seem more philosophical, right? What about things like dependent origination? How come dependent origination is left out? Does that mean dependent origination doesn't matter? Is it irrelevant? Can we discard it as some kind of later and dubious teaching? And that would be interesting, wouldn't it? If after this retreat we decide that dependent origination is irrelevant, we'd throw it out, we put up some big post on the internet and say, we have finally discovered the real teaching of the Buddha. You always see there's always people who have discovered the real teachings, right? The latest on the real teachings of the Buddha. Everybody else has got it wrong. I have got it right. This is it. 2,500 years of Buddha's history. Throw it in the rubbish bin, and now we know what the real thing is. You see these things all the time, and when you see those things, be skeptical. If 2,500 years of Buddhist tradition has got it completely wrong, but you have got it right, or whatever, then there's always grounds for a certain degree of skepticism. And for that reason, we cannot just chuck out dependent origination. The point, of course, is that it is actually included in these things, because these things are it's actually broader than they may seem. So I will show you how some of these things actually are included. So let's start with the 4 Noble Truths. Where do we find the 4 Noble Truths in this? And of course, you find them in particular on the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right? It comes under, the 4 Noble Truths come under that, because you are to discover and see the 4 Noble Truths for what they actually are. So it comes under the idea of right view on the Noble Eightfold Path. So they are right, they are also part of this. Now the 4 Noble Truths in turn, the second Noble Truth is about how craving gives rise to suffering. Right? The craving which has to do with rebirth leading to suffering in the future. Now that particular second Noble Truth can be expanded. There's an expanded version of that. And that expanded version is dependent origination. Because dependent origination is all about how starting with ignorance, which includes craving, eventually leads to suffering, and it shows that chain leading through all the way from the beginning to the end. And then the third Noble Truth is also about dependent origination. It shows how the cessation happens, how Nibbana arises as a consequence of abandoning that craving. It's called the cessation mode of dependent origination. Dependent origination has an origination arising mode, and it has a cessation mode, where the first factor ceases and everything ceases as a consequence. The 5 aggregates, it sounds again like some kind of theory perhaps. That's right there in the first Noble Truth, the Noble Truth of suffering. And so and on you can go and show that actually all of these things come together. And of course the idea here is that some degree of theory, some degree of explanation of the reality of phenomena, how they interact, is necessary to be able to practice properly. You have to understand how things kind of hold together to gain proper confidence and faith in the Buddhist path. If you're just told, do this and she'll be right? You have a problem, because you think, well, maybe it won't be right. Maybe I'll do all this and nothing really doesn't really come out of it. You need to have some kind of framework to understand how things actually work. And this is one of the things that I've always found very useful with the suttas, is to understand the broader picture, how it all fits together, and then you get actually very strong confidence that these teachings really work as you do that. So these are then the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, and they pretty much include the vast majority of things that you find in the 4 main Nikayas of the Pali Suttas. So let's have a quick look at these things. First of all, you have the Satipatthana, right? The 4 applications of mindfulness. And Satipatthana itself is really one way of looking at that. It is just an expansion of the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. The 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is right mindfulness. So Satipatthana slots in right there. The 4 right efforts, Sammapadana is the second one of these things. And Sammapadana, right effort, of course, is the 6th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So it slots in right there. The 4 pathways to supernormal power is the next one. These are the Iddhipadas, and that is all about samadhi practice. When you read that, it's all about samadhi practice. It slots into the last factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. The 5 spiritual faculties and the 5 mental powers are just 2 ways of looking at the same thing, 2 names for the same thing. And these are the faculties that you give rise to when you reach the Noble Eightfold Path properly. When you become an Aryan, these are the faculties, the powers that arise in your mind. So this is just another way of internalizing the Noble Eightfold Path. This is what that really refers to there. The 7 factors of awakening, the Satta Sambojjhanga. Sambojjhangas is the factors of awakening. These are, again, a detailed description of Satipatthana and Samma Samadhi on the Buddhist path. So they are equivalent to the last factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So what I'm saying here is that these 37 factors, in a sense, they can be contracted into the Noble Eightfold Path. They are a different way of looking, they are an expanded way of looking at the Noble Eightfold Path. That's really what it is. Noble Eightfold Path encompasses everything else. And this is why it is one of the 4 noble truths, of course. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path, in turn, can be expanded in different ways. One way is to expand it in this way into 37 factors. Another way of expanding the Noble Eightfold Path is into what is called the gradual training. The gradual training is usually what I like to teach on retreats, because it is a very clear setting out of the practice from the very beginning to the very end. The whole practice is there, starting when you first get faith in the Buddhist teachings all the way till you reach awakening, right? So it's a wonderful, beautiful thing. And somewhere on that path, all of us are going to be there. So the Noble Eightfold Path is expanded into the gradual training. And so this is going to be the main focus on this retreat as well, how to practice all the aspects of this path according to this gradual training. And I don't know, I have always found the gradual training to be, for me, the core thing that has sustained me in my practice, that has kind of informed me what I need to do, how I need to develop my mind, how I need to develop my actions, right? Get rid of some of those bad actions, get some good ones instead, and the speech and all of these difficult things, especially the mind, all of that is included in there. I'm going to talk about at some length during this retreat. Many of the suttas that I teach here will be suttas that are similar to what I have taught before, but please don't feel kind of bored just because it is the same sutta, because there's always slightly different angles of looking at the same thing. Every time you look at the same sutta again, if there has been some time in between since you last looked at it, you will see new things in that sutta every time you look at it. That is what I have found. I can read the same sutta again and again, and I never really find them boring. Every time I read them, I find them inspiring. It gives me renewed energy to actually do what I have to do. So please, think in that way, rather than think, oh no, he's going to teach that same sutta again. I heard it last year already. Don't want to hear it again. Right? It's so easy. And then you're missing out an opportunity to go a little bit deeper into these things. There you are. So that is the things that the Buddha said were the kind of main factors in his training. And then, having said that, having laid down what the monks and the nuns and everyone should safeguard for the future, then he says, this last thing is a very famous statement by the Buddha that he always mentions in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. It comes out here, it also comes out later on, and he says the following: Then the Lord said to the monks, and now monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. The Tathagata's final passing away will not be long delayed. 3 months from now, the Tathagata will take his final Nibbana. These are these very famous words of the Buddha that you see in so many different places. Vaya Dhamma Sankhara, all conditioned things have the nature of decay. Strive on untiringly. Appamadena sampadeta. All conditioned things are of a nature to decay. That translation is fine. Strive on untiringly is not really fine, that translation at all. I'm not happy with the good Maurice Walsh in this particular case. Sometimes I'm going to be a little bit critical of these translators. I feel sorry for these translators trying really hard to do their very best, and then people come around and kind of criticize them, right? It's really unfair. But I think it's important nobody gets everything perfectly right, so I think it's important to kind of look at things from different angles. And appamadena sampadeta, what it really means, appamada is the idea of being heedful, right? That's what it really means in English. The English word heedful means to be careful, to be circumspect, to consider things carefully before you act, before you think, before you do anything. It has to do with yoniso manasikara, the idea of reflecting in a wise way every time we do anything, every time we act in any way. This is what it really comes down to. And that is what the Buddha is saying here. Be heedful, right? And sampadeta means to succeed. So succeed through heedfulness. That is what he's saying. So if you are heedful, if you always have yoniso manasikara, if you always do things in the right way, you will succeed. You will be moving towards success on the Buddhist path. Succeed through heedfulness is essentially what he is saying there. Which is quite different from strive on untiringly, in my opinion. Striving has this idea of always kind of, pushing ourselves, moving on, and it's exactly the thing that I think sometimes people get wrong on the Buddhist path. Instead of learning just to relax and to enjoy and to be present in the present moment, just to learn to be patient and to enjoy what we have already, people strive too much in meditation. And it's interesting, this is something almost all of us, I think, discover while we do our meditation practice. It is so hard to let go of the striving, the idea of always pushing ourselves to some extent. And I know people who have been meditating for 20, 30 years who one day suddenly think, wow, I've been striving too much, right? After 30 years of meditation, they realize that. And it's so hard to see because the striving can sometimes be so subtle. It can be such a habitual, conditioned thing inside of us. It's very, very hard to see that. Sometimes you can be a very good meditator, but you can't go that last little bit because you're still striving too much, pushing yourself too much inside. And then one day you let go of that and bang, wow, now I understand what it's all about. So for that reason, it matters quite a bit how we translate these things. Certain ways of translating can give the wrong ideas, and other ways are much more, get us down the right path in a much better way here. So, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Everything is of a nature to decay. Everything, not decay. Decay is also a bit wrong. Vaya Dhamma. Vaya means to cease, to end, to completely disappear. All conditioned things of a nature to disappear would be a better translation there. And they just disappear completely. Because of that, there's nothing to hold on to in the world. There's nowhere to stand, nothing to grasp onto you. The ground underneath your feet is continuously shaking. Nature is just waiting to pull out the carpet from under your feet. Wham, right? Pulls out the carpet, you lose your balance, you fall over, and you hurt as a consequence. Why? Because you attached, you held on to something that was inherently unreliable, something that was impermanent, that couldn't really be grasped. This is why this is such an important teaching. It reminds us there's nothing really to hold on to in the world. If we're going to hold on, we're going to have to go somewhere else. You hold on temporarily to the Dhamma, it takes you to the other shore, then you let go of the Dhamma as well. Not need to cling to anything anymore. This is what the Buddha is saying here. So, that is a short extract for you from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Very, to my mind, very nice, very beautiful, and it lays down a little bit of the background, and it shows you why I want to focus on the gradual training during this retreat, as I almost always do, so it gives that kind of broader picture what the Buddhist teaching is about. Now I'm going to move on to the next sutta. Maybe I shouldn't actually. It's a quarter of an hour too early. I'm always afraid of doing too much in one go because I usually pack in so much information that after a while your head starts to spin. That's not really the point either. Maybe we'll stop there because even though there's a little bit more time and even though these things are very exciting and inspiring, I think it's important to do these things in a measured way. So, that is all then for this morning, but we will continue, of course, this afternoon again at 3 o'clock. So just keep on enjoying yourself, and we'll see you again at 3 o'clock.